Thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Theodora Alderman clutched her soaking dress, stumbling through the mud with nothing but a hastily packed carpet bag and the bitter sting of her father's final words echoing in her ears. No daughter of mine consorts with federal marshals against her own kin. You're dead to us now. The year was 1878, and at 20 years old, Theodora Thea to the few who'd earned the right to that familiarity found herself cast out from the only home she'd ever known. The rain pelted her mercilessly as she trudged along the deserted trail, the distant lights of Silver Creek offering her only guidance through the darkening evening. Her testimony had sent her cousin to prison for robbery, but she couldn't have stayed silent after witnessing him shoot the bank clerk. Her family, notorious for their loose interpretation of the law, had made their choice. And so had she. 3 miles felt like 30 as she dragged herself forward, her boots sinking into mud with each step. The distant silhouette of a small ranch house appeared through the curtain of rain, the last homestead before town proper. Desperation pushed her forward. Thea's trembling fist rapped against the weathered door as another crack of lightning illuminated the night. She heard movement inside, then the metallic slide of a rifle bolt being drawn back. "Who's there?" a deep voice called out. "A traveler caught in the storm," she answered, her voice breaking. "Please, I need shelter until morning." The door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared, suspicious eyes taking her measure. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 25, with a strong jawline shadowed with stubble and eyes the color of creek water after rainfall. "You're one of the Aldermans, ain't you?" he asked, his voice neither friendly nor hostile. Thea felt her heart sink. Not anymore. Something in her voice must have convinced him. The man pulled the door open wider, revealing broad shoulders and a simple cotton shirt. "Get in before you catch your death," he said, stepping aside. Thea stumbled into warmth and firelight, water pooling around her feet on the wooden floor. The man closed the door against the howling wind, then turned to face her. "Grant Nichols," he introduced himself, setting his rifle aside. "I've got coffee on the stove if you want some." "Theodora," she replied, purposely omitting her surname. "Thank you, Mr. Nichols, I won't trouble you long." His eyes took in her bedraggled appearance and the small bag clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "Looks like trouble's found you already." His voice softened slightly. "Get yourself by the fire, I'll find you something dry to wear." The next morning, Thea awoke disoriented on a narrow cot, wrapped in a quilt that smelled of pine soap and wood smoke. Memory returned slowly: the banishment, the storm, the taciturn cowboy who'd given her shelter. She was wearing an oversized flannel shirt and a pair of drawstring trousers that dwarfed her frame. Her own clothes hung by the fireplace, mostly dry. Grant was already awake, frying bacon on the cast-iron stove. He acknowledged her with a nod. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected to," she admitted. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Nichols." "Just Grant," he corrected. "And you're welcome to stay until you sort yourself out. Town's no place for a woman alone with no prospects." Thea bristled slightly. "I have prospects. I can read and write better than most. I can do figures." A hint of a smile touched Grant's mouth. "Didn't mean offense. Just saying Silver Creek ain't known for welcoming strangers with open arms." He slid a plate of bacon and biscuits toward her. "Especially those with your family name." "I told you I'm not an alderman anymore. I heard you, but folks around here have long memories." She couldn't argue with that. The alderman reputation extended through 3 counties. "I'll be on my way after breakfast," Thea said, picking up a biscuit. Grant shook his head. "Storms washed out the creek crossing. Trail to town will be impassable for at least a day." He moved to the window and gestured. "See for yourself." Thea joined him and saw the normally placid creek had transformed into a raging torrent overnight. Her heart sank. "I've got fence to mend that the storm likely damaged," Grant said. "If you're staying, you might as well make yourself useful." "I'm not a charity case," Thea replied stiffly. "Good," Grant responded, "because I don't run a charity." "You can help with the mending, cooking, whatever needs doing until the water recedes." It was a fair arrangement, if temporary. Thea nodded her agreement. The day passed in honest labor. Thea discovered that while Grant was a man of few words, he wasn't unkind. He showed her his small ranch, 20 acres, a modest herd of cattle, 2 horses, and a milk cow named Daisy. His hands were calloused from work but gentle with the animals. "How long have you been out here alone?" Thea asked as they repaired a section of fence blown down by the storm. 4 years, Grant replied, hammering a nail with precise strokes. "Came out from Pennsylvania with my brother. He decided Montana wasn't for him, headed back east. And you stayed," Grant nodded. "Something about this land gets in your blood." He paused, looking out across the rolling grassland. "It's honest, demanding but honest." Unlike her family, Thea thought but didn't say, when evening came, they settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Grant read from a dog-eared copy of Twain while Thea darned his socks, a skill her mother had insisted upon. The domesticity felt foreign yet somehow right. "Why were you banished?" Grant asked suddenly, closing his book, Thea's hands stilled. "I testified against my cousin Jeremiah. He robbed the bank in Helena, shot the clerk. They asked me what I saw, and I told the truth." Grant studied her for a long moment. "That took courage, or foolishness," she replied bitterly. "My father called me a traitor to my blood. Your father's wrong," Grant's voice was firm. "There's no honor in protecting murderers, kin or not." Coming from anyone else, Thea might have taken offense. But there was something in Grant's straightforward manner that made his words a balm rather than a wound. 3 days passed before the creek subsided enough to cross. Each day, Thea found reasons to make herself indispensable, reorganizing Grant's meager pantry, teaching him a better way to keep his accounts, even baking bread in the temperamental oven that hadn't seen proper use in months. On the 4th morning, Grant announced, "Trail's clear enough. I can take you to town today if you're still set on going." The words hung between them. Thea realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to leave. This small cabin with its leaky roof and creaky floorboards felt more like home than the Alderman ranch ever had. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "You mentioned needing help with the accounts and winter's coming. If you're amenable, perhaps I could stay on, as your housekeeper, for wages, of course." Grant's expression remained neutral, but she detected a flicker of something in his eyes. "It's a lonely life out here, not much in the way of company." "I've had my fill of company," Thea replied. "Quiet suits me fine." He considered this, then nodded once. "I can offer room, board, and $5 a month, more if the cattle sell well at spring auction." "That's fair," she agreed, extending her hand formally. Grant took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. As autumn progressed into winter, they developed a rhythm. Grant taught Thea to ride properly, not side saddle, as her mother had insisted, and Thea introduced Grant to the novels she'd managed to pack in her escape. Evenings were spent in companionable silence by the fire, occasionally broken by discussion of books or ranch matters. The first snow fell in November, blanketing the land in pristine white. Grant showed Thea how to use snowshoes to check the farthest fences. She fell repeatedly, laughing despite the cold. Grant's laughter joined hers, a sound she realized she'd rarely heard but treasured. Christmas approached, and Thea found herself wanting to make the holiday special. While Grant was out checking the herd, she gathered pine boughs to decorate the cabin and secretly worked on knitting him a scarf from wool she'd carefully unraveled from an old blanket. On Christmas Eve, Grant returned from town with supplies and an unexpected package wrapped in brown paper. "Thought you might like this," he said gruffly, handing it to her. Thea unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "For your stories," Grant explained. "I've seen you scribbling on scraps of paper when you think I'm not looking." Tears pricked Thea's eyes. No one had ever encouraged her writing before. Her father had called it a waste of time. Her mother had warned that men didn't like women with fanciful ideas. "Thank you," she whispered, touching the smooth cover reverently. That night, as they sat before the fire drinking cider spiced with cinnamon, Grant spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of parents who'd loved him but died too young, of dreams deferred and others realized. Thea shared stories of her own, the good moments among the bad, the secret hope she'd always harbored of making her own way. "I never thanked you properly," Thea said softly, "for taking me in that night." "You've more than earned your keep," Grant replied. "That's not what I meant." Thea met his eyes. "You could have turned me away, most would have, knowing my name." Grant was quiet for a moment. "Names don't mean much out here. It's what a person does that counts." The winter deepened, confining them often to the cabin. Thea discovered Grant had a talent for wood carving and watched, fascinated, as he shaped blocks of pine into delicate figures: horses, cattle, once even a small bird that he presented to her without ceremony. In January, they received word that Jeremiah Alderman had died in prison during a brawl. Thea felt a complicated grief, not for the cousin who'd threatened to kill her if she testified, but for the boy he'd once been, fishing with her in the creek behind her father's house. Grant found her that evening on the porch, staring at the stars through eyes blurred with tears. "You're allowed to mourn him," he said, draping a blanket around her shoulders, "even if he didn't deserve it." "I'm not mourning him," Thea replied. "I'm mourning who I thought my family was, who I wanted them to be." Grant stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Family isn't always blood," he said quietly. She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Without thought, she reached for his hand. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm despite the cold night air. They stayed like that, connected in silence, until the cold drove them back inside. February brought a blizzard that howled for 3 days straight. They huddled by the fire, reading aloud to each other as the wind threatened to tear the roof from the cabin. On the third night, as they prepared for bed, Thea on her cot, Grant on his pallet near the stove, the temperature plummeted further. "This is foolishness," Grant said after watching Thea pile every available blanket onto her narrow bed. "We'll both freeze at this rate." He dragged his bedding over to her cot. "If we combine our blankets and share the space, we'll stay warmer." Thea felt her cheeks flush, but practicality won out over propriety. They arranged themselves awkwardly at first, back to back on the narrow cot. But as the night deepened and the temperature dropped further, they gravitated toward each other's warmth. Thea woke in the gray dawn to find herself nestled against Grant's chest, his arm draped protectively around her. She should have moved away immediately, but instead found herself studying his face in sleep, the dark sweep of his eyelashes, the slight crease between his brows, the unexpected softness of his mouth. His eyes opened, catching her watching him. For a breathless moment, neither moved. "I should start the fire," Grant said finally, his voice rough with sleep. Thea nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The blizzard broke later that day, but something had shifted between them. Their casual touches lingered longer. Their eyes met more frequently across the cabin. The air seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. In March, as the first hints of spring softened the landscape, Grant announced he needed to ride to the neighboring ranch to help with a difficult calving. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. But tomorrow came and went with no sign of him. By evening of the second day, Thea was frantic with worry. Against her better judgment, she saddled Grant's old mare and set out toward the Patterson ranch, fighting rising panic. Halfway there, she spotted a figure on horseback moving slowly through the gathering dusk. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by anger. "Where have you been?" she demanded as Grant drew closer. "I was worried sick. Calving went bad," he explained wearily. "Mare died. Had to help bury her and then got caught in that squall." Only then did Thea notice his exhaustion, the slump of his shoulders, the dried blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, all anger evaporating. "Just a scratch from the fence." "I'm fine, Thea, just tired." Back at the cabin, she insisted on tending his wound, a jagged cut that would leave another scar among the many that mapped his body. As she carefully cleaned it, her hands steady despite her racing heart, Grant watched her face. "You were really worried," he said softly. Thea met his eyes. I thought I'd lost you. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Grant reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You won't lose me, Thea, he promised. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but deepened as she responded. His hands cradled her face as if she were precious, irreplaceable. Later, tangled in blankets before the fire, Grant traced patterns on the bare skin of her shoulder. I've been thinking, he said, his voice rumbling beneath her ear where it rested on his chest. $5 a month seems poor compensation for a woman who can run accounts, mend fences, and save a man from freezing to death. Thea propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. What did you have in mind instead? Marriage, Grant said simply. If you'll have me. Joy bloomed in Thea's chest, but caution tempered it. Are you certain? I bring nothing but my name, and that's more liability than asset. You bring yourself, Grant replied. That's all I want or need. Spring arrived in earnest, melting the last snowdrifts and painting the hills with wildflowers. Thea and Grant were married by the circuit preacher in Silver Creek, a simple ceremony witnessed by the Pattersons and a few of Grant's other neighbors. No one from the Alderman family attended, though Thea had sent word through a trusted friend. Their wedding night was spent in their own cabin, transformed by Thea's touch over the months into a true home. New curtains hung at the windows, quilts brightened the furniture, and bookshelves Grant had built lined one wall, gradually filling with volumes ordered from catalogs. I have something for you, Grant said, producing a small wooden box. Inside, Thea found a deed with both their names, Grant and Theodora Nichols, listed as equal owners of the ranch. I can't accept this, she breathed. This is your land. Our land now, Grant corrected. Our home, our future. That summer was the happiest of Thea's life. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Grant's cattle fetched good prices, and Thea's careful accounting ensured they had funds to improve the property, a new barn, an expanded garden, even a piano that arrived on the freight wagon to everyone's astonishment. Can you even play? Grant asked as the deliverymen positioned it in the corner of their expanded cabin. I had lessons for years, Thea admitted, though my teacher always said I played with more enthusiasm than skill. That evening, after the chores were done, she played for him simple tunes at first, then more complex pieces as her fingers remembered their training. Grant watched her with naked admiration. You're full of surprises, Mrs. Nichols, he said, joining her on the bench. Autumn came again, painting the landscape in gold and crimson. 1 year since the stormy night when Thea had appeared on Grant's doorstep, desperate and alone. They celebrated with a special dinner and exchanged simple gifts, a new hat for Grant, handmade by Thea. A silver locket for Thea, carefully selected by Grant on his last trip to Helena. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thea took Grant's hand and placed it gently over her abdomen. I have another gift, she said softly, though it won't arrive until spring. Grant's eyes widened as understanding dawned. A baby, Thea nodded, suddenly uncertain. Are you pleased? His answer was to sweep her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing breathlessly. Careful, Thea protested, though she couldn't stop smiling. I'm in a delicate condition, or so Mrs. Patterson tells me. Grant set her gently on her feet, his face alight with joy. I love you, Theodora Nichols, he said, his voice thick with emotion, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, she replied. You gave me shelter when I had none, but more than that, you gave me a home, a real home. The baby, a girl they named Emma, arrived with the spring thaw. She had Grant's eyes and Thea's determined chin. The day after her birth, as Thea rested in their bed with Emma cradled in her arms, a visitor arrived, Thea's younger sister, Margaret. Maggie, Thea breathed, hardly believing her eyes. How did you? I've wanted to come for ages, her sister interrupted, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. But father, well, you know, he still won't speak your name. Grant appeared behind Maggie. I'll give you two some time, he said, but Thea shook her head. Stay, she requested. This is your family too. Maggie approached the bed cautiously, peering down at the sleeping infant. She's beautiful, Thea. Would you like to hold your niece? Thea offered as Maggie cradled Emma. Tears filled her eyes. I've missed you so much. Mother has too, though she won't say it openly. Are they well? Thea asked, throat tight with complex emotion. Maggie nodded. As well as can be expected, Father's health isn't what it was. She hesitated. He's too proud to admit it, but I think he regrets how things ended between you. He knows where to find me, Thea said, not unkindly. This door is always open. Maggie stayed for a week, helping with the baby and reconnecting with her sister. Before she left, she promised to return for Emma's first birthday, with or without Father's blessing. Summer passed in a blur of baby care and ranch work. Grant proved to be a devoted father, often carrying Emma with him for simple chores, pointing out cattle and wildflowers to her attentive gaze. She's too young to understand, Thea teased him once. She understands more than we think, Grant replied, watching as Emma's tiny hand grasped a sunflower petal. By Emma's first birthday, the ranch had expanded further. Grant had purchased adjoining land when the elderly owner decided to return east to live with his daughter. They now had 40 acres, a growing herd, and even 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse Grant had built. The celebration was a community affair, with neighbors bringing food and small gifts. To Thea's astonishment, not only Maggie attended, but her mother as well. Elizabeth Alderman, looking older and more tentative than Thea remembered, arrived clutching a handmade quilt for her granddaughter. The reunion was tearful but healing. Elizabeth explained that she'd finally stood up to Thea's father. I told him I wouldn't miss knowing my granddaughter for his stubborn pride, she said, holding Emma close. He'll come around in his own time. And if he doesn't, Thea replied, we'll manage, we always do. That evening, after the guests had departed and Emma slept peacefully in the cradle Grant had carved for her, Thea found her husband on the porch, looking out at the land they'd built together. Happy? He asked as she slipped her arm around his waist. Beyond measure, Thea replied honestly. I never thought I could have this: a home, a family, a life filled with purpose and love. Grant pulled her closer. That stormy night when you knocked on my door, I almost didn't answer. Why did you? Something in your voice, he admitted. You sounded like someone who needed more than just shelter. I needed a home, Thea agreed. I just didn't know it would be you. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of the children they hoped would join Emma, of the ranch's expansion, of books Thea wanted to write someday. Dreams shared and multiplied between them. 5 years later, the Nichols Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Emma, now a lively 6-year-old, had been joined by twin brothers, Samuel and Daniel, who at 3 years old were already showing their father's love of the land and their mother's stubborn determination. On the anniversary of their wedding day, Grant surprised Thea with a new addition to the house, a study of her very own, with built-in shelves, a writing desk, and a window overlooking the mountains. For your stories, he explained. It's time the world heard them. Thea's first novel, based loosely on her own experiences, was published the following year to modest but encouraging success. Her father, finally reconciled though never fully repentant, proudly displayed a copy in his parlor despite the fact that the villain bore a striking resemblance to himself. Life wasn't perfect. There were droughts and blizzards, illnesses and accidents, disputes with neighbors and difficult decisions. But through it all, Thea and Grant faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing year. On the 10th anniversary of the stormy night that had brought them together, they hosted a gathering at the ranch, now expanded to include a proper dining room that could accommodate all their friends and family. As Thea looked around the table at the faces of those she loved, Grant, their children, her mother and sister, neighbors who had become dear friends, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Later, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Grant found her in her study, writing by lamplight. Working on a new story, he asked, massaging her shoulders. Just finishing this one, Thea replied, leaning into his touch. About a woman banished from her family and the cowboy who opened his door. How does it end? Grant asked, though he knew the answer. Thea smiled, turning to face him. They built a life together day by day, season by season. They created a home where there had only been a house, a family where there had been loneliness. She rose to embrace him. He made her his forever, but more importantly, they made a forever together. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering on the roof much like it had that fateful night. But this time, Thea Nichols was already home, already sheltered, already where she was always meant to be.